Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of Conversations with Catholics. I am particularly excited for this episode because this episode has been a long time coming. The guest for today and I have had many conversations in text form in various Reddit threads on Debate a Catholic, on the Catholic subreddit, on Debate exCatholic, and most recently on the Catholic Apologetics website. My guest for today is actually the CEO and not exactly founder, but something close to the Catholic Apologetics subreddit, which is linked in the description down below. Welcome to Conversations with Catholics. James, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. I mean that this conversation has been a long time coming because I don't know about you, but I feel like I think I've seen like you on the various Reddit threads for 2 years or something, right? I feel like the first time that we probably commented on each other's threads was probably like 2 years ago or something like that.
I honestly wouldn't be surprised. Like, I am very active in a lot of the different, as you mentioned, different debate religious subreddits. I actually made my own community that's just for me that has like debate an atheist, ask an atheist, debate religion, debate a Christian, ask like if it's a debate religion subreddit, I'm there in some capacity.
Cool. So needless to say, it sounds like you enjoy the intellectual rigor of debating religion. And for my audience, I think they've gathered by the title of this episode, but what religion are you a part of?
I am a Roman Catholic, more specifically, especially for those that are super into Catholicism, the Novus Ordo. And I actually was in seminary for about 2.5 years for Catholic priesthood.
Okay, wow. And it was a Novus Ordo seminary, so it wasn't like,
yes.
Okay, cool. Okay. And I mentioned in the intro there that you are the CEO of Catholic Apologetics, the subreddit. You want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. So the guy that's actually running it came across a dead subreddit called Catholic Apologetics. When he came across it, there was only 2 posts. Fides et Opera is his username. And he was looking around trying to find people to help him out. He came across me, very similar way as you, Kevin, across the many different religious subreddits, and sent me an invite. I looked at some of the posts that he himself had done and that he was trying to do, and I said, hey man, this is something that I've always wanted to do. This is something that I've tried to do on my own a couple of times. I want to help you run it. And so I became a co-moderator with him. We set up a Discord that's a lot more active than the subreddit, which is part of our focus. But yes, so while I'm not the founder or creator of it, I have a very large role to play within the community.
That's awesome. I don't think I actually knew about the Discord, but I'll be super happy to link the Discord in the description down below for any of my Catholic friends. And do you have like a vetting process for the Discord?
Not really. There's just like the basic that you would get for a Discord. It's more like, hey, how did you hear about us? What religion are you? And then if you are not Catholic, are you willing to respect and recognize that this is a place to help people grow within the Catholic faith?
Okay, cool. We'll talk after the episode's over about whether or not you want that linked in the description down below. And if you do, great. And if not, no worries. Because, all kinds come to my channel. So if you're not looking for all kinds, I totally understand.
So, just to kind of let you know how it's like a mixture of both strict and relaxed. Absolutely. Okay. One of the mods on the Discord is actually a lapsed Catholic. And is actually a member of the Church of Satan.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Okay. However, he has shown a lot of respect for Catholicism, a lot of understanding. And, so as long as you're willing to show respect, willing to show the fact that you are there to, as I like to put it, help make sure that we're not an echo chamber and help point out areas that could be stronger within our discourse, you're more than welcome to come in, as long as, like, if someone comes in and says, hey, I want to know what the church says about X, you defer to what the church actually says, or to, those like myself and some of the other moderators on what the church actually says.
Cool. I mean, that's awesome. I hope that my Reddit posts have been kind of like that, where like I never aim to. And so for those of you in the audience watching this who don't know, before I even started my YouTube channel, I was kind of just writing these long, weird essays that I was posting to the unfortunately like now defunct Debate a Catholic subreddit. And I like to think, and I should ask Catholics this question, but I like to think that my Reddit posts were all respectful of Catholicism, and I like to think that I'm capable of that as somebody who spent most of my life as a Catholic.
Yes.
But it's important that fine people like yourself are making sure that people like myself are being respectful. So,
So if it's any consolation, Kevin, I did look at a couple of your videos and a couple of your posts before joining today, and yes, and that was one of the big reasons why I was willing to show, because you didn't bully your guests, you didn't try to tell them, no, you actually believe this. You actually let them share their insight and did your best to actually showcase, while still presenting your position in as strong as light as possible, showing the Catholic position in as best of a light as you understood it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I do my best. I know I don't always do a good job, but I do my best to, just what you said. I've got a question for you though about the Catholic Apologetics subreddit.
Yes.
So there are a few different like tangentially related Catholic subreddits. So I already mentioned the Debate a Catholic subreddit, which I don't know what happened to that one, but it's just there's been no new posts. I've tried to submit some, and I think it's unmoderated at this point. But there's the Catholicism subreddit, which is huge. It's like it's the biggest Catholic subreddit.
Yes.
So there's Catholic philosophy too. That's another Catholic subreddit. But Catholic apologetics is different. So how is it different? And like what niche do you see Catholic apologetics filling that Catholic memes, Catholic philosophy, Catholicism don't fill? Like where does Catholic apologetics kind of fit into the big picture?
Yeah. So Catholicism, it's too big, and so because of it, you're going to get a large varying quality of answers. Where just as an example, there was a post made a few days ago, as of this recording, on why Thomas Aquinas wrote that it is okay for husbands to use corporeal punishment for their wives when the wife was an unrepentant cheater. And elsewhere, Aquinas does say that, like, effectively what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So, like, if it's good for husbands to do it, it's good for wives to do it as well. But you had a lot of people in there that were attacking this doctor of the church by appealing to emotion. And whether you agree with Aquinas or not, and you're more than free to, especially in that area, you can't do it through an appeal to emotion. You gotta do it by showing that either A, his understanding of morality was wrong, or B, maybe you're missing something, or even C, you're just misunderstanding what Aquinas is even trying to say. Oftentimes I find C is the answer in that type of situation. So Catholicism has because it's so huge, you're going to get a varying degree of quality of answers that might not be beneficial. Catholic philosophy, on the other hand, philosophy is a very different approach than what apologetics is, where philosophy is more on the art of explaining why you, Kevin, need to believe this. Apologetics is, Kevin, this is why I, James, believe this. So Catholic philosophy is about convincing others to believe what you believe, whereas apologetics is explaining why you believe what you believe. And those are two very different situations.
Explaining to yourself or explaining to other people?
So it has more to do, like, if you were to come up to me and say, hey, James, why are you Catholic? I'm going to give you a very different answer than if you came up to me and said, hey, James, why should I be Catholic?
Okay. And the latter is philosophy and the former is apologetics?
Correct.
Okay. Interesting. I'm not sure, and I shouldn't say what other people believe and don't believe, but like
Yeah.
I wonder if we ask somebody like Trent Horn or Jimmy Akin or anybody who like Catholic apologists who kind of TM, right? I wonder if they would share that definition or if they would modify it somehow, and I'm not sure, and we'd have to ask them. So
Yeah.
when me and you and Trent get on the phone together, we can have that conversation. But
Right. I would say that because it's something that I kind of come to my own realization. But if you look at the way that the apologists answer questions, or the way that or the types of questions that they're responding to, it's always about the individual Catholic and less about convincing the other person. Whereas philosophy in and of itself is that act of convincing the other person. It's why in the Summa Theologica, you have Aquinas saying, this is what we mean when we say God. Like, he's defining and explaining what it is that he believes. Whereas in his lesser known work on Being in Essence, where he is trying to convince someone that there is a God and why they should believe that there is a God, it's a completely different language, and he doesn't end it with, and this is what we mean when we say God. It's, no, this thing is God.
So do you think that the Summa is more of an apologetic work than a philosophical work?
It absolutely is.
Cool.
In fact, it's even, one of the earliest posts that I did on Catholic Apologetics was actually to find the difference between philosophy, theology, and apologetics. And the Summa Theologica is more of a apologetics tool than it is a philosophical tool. But what it is it's Aquinas sitting down and using the tools of philosophy, which is, logic and reason, to understand the Catholic faith, and where he's taking the dogmas or what's been handed down through tradition, and then taking those aspects and reasoning it to new heights. And that's what theology is. And then apologetics is just effectively saying, yeah, no, like this is the route I took to arrive at this conclusion.
And so when Aquinas is talking about, like, to use your example from earlier, like when it's okay for somebody to beat their wife, do you think that that's an example of people misunderstanding Thomas, or is that an example of Thomas being wrong? Or is this an example of just doubling down and saying, no, it's absolutely fine to beat your wife sometimes?
Yeah.
I'm being facetious here because I know that's not the answer, but
so to me, it's a little bit of both. The fact of the matter is that gets into a question of morality. Now, if I was to ask you, how do you feel about corporeal punishments in society? Not even just like in a relation setting, but a corporeal punishment where the government takes a criminal and they inflict some type of physical punishment on them. I think we would have different answers depending on different view on what is moral and what isn't. And so what Aquinas is arguing for is not abuse. And I'm going to be very clear on that because that's how a lot of people were taking it. It is not abuse. Have you seen I Love Lucy?
Yes.
Okay. So, in that society, it was normal for the husband to inflict corporeal punishment within reason. It was usually, an over-the-lap spanking. And that was moral and perfectly acceptable within that society. We as a society have moved away from that now. But that's what Aquinas is describing, not the physical abuse. We have noticed some dangers associated with that. And so you're more than welcome to disagree with Aquinas. My issue with it, and the reason why I brought that up, was just because people were like, no, it's always abuse. And it's like, well, no, let's actually look at it. Let's actually explore what you're saying. Because even if you are right, we need to give a better answer than just an appeal to emotion.
I want to push you on this one a little bit.
Yes.
Because it's possible that I misunderstood you, but maybe I didn't. So did you say that it can be moral to beat your wife sometimes? Like, depending on what kind of society you're in?
No. So what I was getting at was if corporeal punishments are moral and there is a structure to it, then just like how, and even like right now we're having in our society, we're having a conversation on whether it is morally acceptable to spank your children. We're right in the middle of that conversation right now, to my understanding. Like there's people on one fence and people on another. 50 years ago, we were in the middle of that conversation about husbands and wives. At the time of Aquinas, that wasn't a conversation being had. So what I was getting at more so was, if you want to disagree with Aquinas, you need to have a better reason than just an appeal to emotion. So we as a society have moved away. Now, is this a case of like where, as Jesus said in the scripture, God never wanted you to divorce, but because of the hardness of your heart, Moses let you? So is this a case of God never wanted corporeal punishment between husband and wives, parents and children, but because of the hardness of our hearts, he permitted that until we grew in our spiritual maturity to move away from it? Or is there something else going on? The biggest issue I've got is lazy thinking, I think is the best way. And why I use it is because there was a lot of lazy thinking happening in that thread, even if I agreed with their conclusion.
And their conclusion with which you agreed was that it is always wrong to hit your wife and your children, or no?
Yes.
Okay, so it is always, and yeah, so I find that sometimes Catholics get a little, sometimes when I push Catholics on, and let me kind of, I'm trying to think of too many things at once. Sometimes Catholics, in my experience, will talk about morality, and you didn't do this for the record, but sometimes Catholics will say something like, oh, well, it was okay back then, but it's not okay now. To which my response is, wait a minute, I thought you were an objectivist about morality, because that's the subjectivist position. If something used to be okay in one culture, but now it's not in a different culture, that is subjective morality. And that's cool. If you're a subjective like if you adhere to subjective morality, own that. Yeah, I mean, I believe it's subjective. Oh, sweet. Okay, then it was okay back then. It's not okay now. But by and large, I find that Catholics claim to be objectivists about morality, but then sometimes they will say things like, well, it was actually okay to beat your spouse in the 1950s, and it's not okay today. But you didn't say that. You said, no, it's always wrong to beat your spouse, right? I'm not putting words in your mouth when I say that. You said it's always wrong.
So, and like I said, and that's what I was getting at, is just like, look, if you're going to hold a position, you got to have solid reasoning behind it, no matter what it is. And so the reason, so to kind of go back to like, what is our purpose and what is the niche we're hoping to fill with the subreddit Catholic Apologetics, is because right now we're small, we have a lot more control on the quality. And then two, it's less of people coming in like you're able to do in Catholicism and say, hey, what's the answer to X? Rather, it is a situation for myself and other individuals that are learned within the faith to come in and provide resources, or, you know, as you put in, you know, for yourself, like essays on the different subjects, explaining the Catholic faith in an easy, digestible way, with resources and other things that you would need to be able to know how to respond when someone asks a hard question that you weren't ready for.
Is it fair to say that the goal of the Catholic Apologetics subreddit is to be more scholarly, perhaps, than the regular old Catholic? Yeah, because the Catholic subreddit is filled with plenty of posts where people will just say like, went to mass today and had a great confession. God is good. Great, fantastic. That has nothing to do with Catholic apologetics, though, so probably doesn't belong on the Catholic Apologetics subreddit.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. I think that makes sense. Cool. And let me ask a selfish question. Would somebody like me be welcome to engage in the Catholic subreddit, or is it more of a training ground for apologists and to be apologists? Not really a place for debate.
So you are more than welcome to engage, because in order for it to be a training ground, we need people to engage with. Um, all we ask is when you engage, it needs to be done in a state of, hey, help me understand this, or can you explain this to me, or this isn't making sense, and less of a you're wrong because of XYZ. It needs to be done in a charitable way, and we're going to moderate, the Catholics as well, to make sure that they're responding in charitable ways as well. We're looking for it to be a safe place for both Catholics and non-Catholics to engage in a way that helps facilitate understanding. The atheist moderator that I mentioned, Melikor Sor, I think is how you pronounce his Discord name, and Reddit username as well, has expressed to us that, hey, I'm still not convinced, but you guys have brought to light a couple of misconceptions I used to have about Catholicism, and that's what we're looking for.
That's awesome.
Is to bring about understanding in areas of the faith that are so often misunderstood.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that kind of segues into one of the main questions that I think I had for you. And this is where we might do a little bit of, kind of back and forth a little bit. I don't expect it to get, we'll get a little bit bloody, but I don't think we'll lose any limbs or anything like that. Just a couple, We'll come away with some nice scars. But I've gone on record as expressing skepticism about something that I have perhaps uncharitably called the apologetics industrial machine. And what I mean by that is almost the exact opposite of what you just said. So what you just talked about as one of the goals of the, and again, please correct me if I'm misspeaking here, but you said something along the lines of the goal of the Catholic Apologetics subreddit is not so much to just give you an answer. Here's the answer. Have fun. No, the goal is rather, this is how you should think about it. These are the resources that you should visit. This is kind of like, it's more about the journey than the destination, maybe is a way to put it.
Yes.
Okay. And that's awesome. And that's what I'm all about. And I think that my biggest critique of what I've labeled the apologetics industrial machine is precisely the opposite of what you just said. Sometimes I find that apologists, and, again, perhaps I'm just being uncharitable here, but I've often said something along the lines of like I would consider Catholic philosophy and Catholic apologetics to be two totally different things, where Catholic philosophy is concerned with the journey, but Catholic apologetics is concerned with the destination. As in, I have called apologetics the thing that kind of has an answer already, and then apologetics is just about, we're going to get to that answer no matter what we no matter what kind of acrobatics we have to perform to get there, we're going to get there. But philosophy is like, no, we don't know where we're going to wind up. Let's just kind of think about it and see. But you see it differently, it sounds like.
So I, when you and I made the decision, I go every Sunday to brunch with my parents, and I was having a conversation with my mother about it, and, about some of the topics that we were going to discuss and how excited I was for it. And this was actually one of the ones that came up, and the conversation we had, because I had one idea on like how we were going to address this conversation, but the conversation we had made me come to a realization as to why I think it is what it is. So the first one goes to what you were saying. It's like, hey, we've got an answer already, and we're going to get there no matter what. So that has to do with the fact that apologetics is about, James, why do you believe this? Well, I already made that journey. I'm going to show you what my journey looked like, and you're going to walk that journey with me. But that's going to be a different answer than if you were to ask me, James, why should I be a Catholic? So that's the first reason why apologetics comes across that way. And I think the second reason is a little bit more indicative of an underlying issue that we have within the Catholic faith. And it has to do with the way that people perceive it. And what I mean by that is, if you look at a lot of these religious subreddits, or a lot of the people that are extremely outspoken against Christianity, 99% of them are ex-Christians. And if you were to ask them, hey, what was your spiritual journey like? A lot of them would say something along the lines of, I had to, listen. I had to obey. I couldn't ask a question. I just had to take it. And I saw, based on the story that you had shared on that same subreddit where we made that decision to finally have this conversation, you shared a little bit of your history, and mine was identical, except for the part that I was allowed to ask questions. And so what ends up happening is, because I was allowed to ask questions, but the atheist I'm talking to wasn't allowed to ask questions, their response is, "What do you mean? How could you have gotten to this conclusion? Because it was forced to me. So there's no way you could have reasoned your way to that conclusion. You must have been told it and then reasoned your way backwards to it." One of my most popular posts on, funnily enough, Debate and Atheist, was the reasons why I am Catholic. Now, what helped was I made it very clear, like, this is not a debate post. I asked, what if people would like to hear my faith story, and there was a lot of people that wanted to hear it, and I shared it. But a lot of people were still asking, were you born Catholic, or did this lead you to your conversion? Now, I was born Catholic, yes. But just like how Descartes, even though he was born in this world, was able to put a stop to everything and question everything to then lead to the conclusions of his worldview, you're able to do the same even if you're born into Catholicism or Christianity or Islam or whatever your faith may be. So the biggest issue as to why I think a lot of us, especially former Christians, have with apologetics is because of the fact that they weren't allowed to question. So how could this person have been allowed to question to come to these conclusions?
Yeah, that's like definitely a part of it. And I telling you when like I think in the thread that we decided to have this conversation, I don't know if I told this exact story, but I'll never forget this one time that I expressed to my dad, like, I wanted to read Muslim apologetics books so that I better understood why they were wrong. And my dad actually told me not to. He's like, "No, don't." He's like, if anything, like, have a priest read them and then the priest can explain it to you. And I was kind of like, like, what? And
Which I find hilarious. The reason why I find that hilarious, it's sad that that's what happened, but the reason why I find it hilarious is because I'll never forget, in my studies, we had a whole class on Nietzsche, just Nietzsche alone, and reading his actual writings.
That's awesome.
One of our, our classic philosophers, so like going over like Plato onward to right up about the Middle Ages, was taught by an atheist. Our Middle Ages philosophy, the class I elected to be in, was done by, I'll never forget him, Father Lehrberger. And he was a big proponent of reading the primary sources. And he said, look, if you questioning the faith causes you to fall away from the faith in your search for truth, I'm not worried, because if you are searching for truth, the truth will lead you back.
We said the same thing, but we would say that and then not follow through on it, if that makes sense. We would say things like, it's fine to ask questions, but then the attitude was, ask the question, receive your answer, and then get back in line. That was the actual truth, despite the lip service that we gave to following the truth wherever it may lead. We didn't actually do that.
Yeah, I was fortunate where my parents actually believed that. It helped that a lot of my family were non-Catholics. And then the seminary and university that I went to also followed through on that. So I definitely had a very fortunate upbringing within my Catholic faith that is alien to what most, if not all, people experience. And when you combine that with the way that the scientific Methodist approach, where it's not just lip service, it's no, you do question everything and you try to figure out the answer. When you have an apologetics come in and is walking you through their journey, it comes off as insincere, even if it is a sincere journey.
Yeah. So that just inspired a. So here's a question for you.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like you and I are kind of on the same page already.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that what I've been calling, like I've been meaning one thing by apologetics, and you've been meaning a different thing by apologetics. However, the thing that I'm talking about, we both decry, and the thing that you're talking about, we both think is cool.
Yes.
So let me ask you this question then.
Mm-hmm.
And this could just be like a yay or a nay, but Frank Turek. Yeah, and do you know Frank Turek? Because he's not Catholic.
I do not.
Okay. Frank Turek is a Christian, not like a Protestant apologist. And I think that he's the worst. I just think he's really bad. And this isn't fair because he's not here to defend himself. Not that he needs, but so I consider him to be the epitome of having an answer and then just doing whatever he has to do to arrive there. But he's not Catholic.
Closest, I think, to get to what you're describing that I've had experience was the Bill Nye versus, and I don't even remember his name anymore, but the guy that was trying to argue for a literal reading of Genesis.
Yes, Ken Ham.
That's him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, yes, absolutely. That is not how it's supposed to be, and is the example of the lazy thinking that I was talking about that I'm trying to help Catholics not do.
And so it probably won't surprise you to learn that I grew up a young Earth creationist, and we loved Ken Ham growing up. And like, so despite the fact that we both grew up Catholic, I think that we both grew up very differently, and
Yes.
that probably speaks to the difference between growing up trad versus growing up Novus Ordo.
Well, that definitely might have a factor to it. I think it's less of a factor than one would think. Like, it definitely did play a factor. But what it comes down to, what I really think it is fear of the teacher. And so, because I had such a knack for understanding my faith, because I understood it to a very high level while being able to explain it in an easy to digest way. Even when I was 16 years old, I was volunteering and helping with continuing Christian education within my church. And I would be talking with some of the other teachers, and they'd be ignorant on things that I, as 16-year-old, knew. And so what ends up happening is, because the education stops at a fourth grade level for most Catholics, when you have a sixth grader now asking a sixth grade level question, but the teacher never went beyond the fourth grade level, they don't know. And so they do shut that down. And that is something that I wish I had an answer for. And it's definitely something that I've always wished I could fix within the Catholic faith, because it's a travesty. And it leads to the hurt and the miscommunications amongst, our fellow man, let alone fellow Christian.
Yeah. So speaking of teachers not knowing things that they probably should know, I'll never forget. So I went to school in the basement of the FSSP Catholic Church that my grandparents founded. One of our teachers told us that other stars were within our solar system. Like they orbited our sun, just like planets do. And this one kid, a year older than me, he raised his hand. He's like, "I'm so sorry. That's not right." And his teacher was like, "No, it is right. Go ask another teacher." So he went into the other room. He grabbed the other teacher. The other teacher came back. And he's like, "I'm so sorry, but there are no other stars besides our one star inside of our solar system. You're thinking of galaxy. You're mixing up galaxy with the solar system." But and I know that has nothing to do with religion, but I do think that might illustrate one of the problems with the way that I grew up. We had people who were I don't mean to talk poorly about anybody.
Yeah.
They were well-meaning adults who only wanted the best for us kids. But they were not prepared to teach the levels that they were teaching at. And I'm even talking about, like, they weren't prepared to teach fourth grade and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Like, you're not going to get any disagreement from me on that. It's an epidemic within the Catholic faith, unfortunately. It's the source of. I honestly believe it's the source of a lot of the problems that we have within our organization.
I 100% agree. And I didn't grow up Novus Ordo, so I can't speak to the Novus Ordo movement. But what I can say is that within the trad movement, this kind of education is not only rampant and everywhere, it's also seen as like virtuous and kind of like the goal. Like everybody wants their children to be homeschooled by their wife who didn't go to college. And you're like, wait a minute.
So, I mean, and so here's the thing that's crazy is, like, I was homeschooled. My mom didn't go to college, no college education or anything. But she went, because she knew she didn't have a college education and she wanted us to be well educated, she went out to find the best program that she could afford. And I've always had, and she saw that I always had a love for knowledge and learning, and she did everything she could to foster that. So, it's what it has to do, like you said, is that fear of taking that risk. I was the one to convince my mom of evolutionary theory.
Huh. That's really funny.
Yes. But that's because she was humble enough to recognize and understand that she doesn't have all the answers. And the thing that I find hilarious about, the trad movement that is really pushing for the young earth creation and everything else is when you actually look at church history, that's a Protestant idea, not a Catholic one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been saying this for a while now, but like horseshoe theory is real, and like you go this way, and then there we go. Like the Catholic fundamentalists and the Protestant fundamentalists are actually much closer than you would imagine.
Yes.
And so did you grow up a young earth creationist then, and then you wound up convincing your mom? How old were you when you thought evolution was true? Did you kind of always think it was true, or?
It's very muggy, is what I'm gonna say.
Okay,
like,
that's fair. Yeah.
I knew of these. Yeah, I knew of these two ideas almost simultaneously, and I knew that they had to work together somehow, even if I didn't fully understand it. Because one of my texts for religion, and I want to say I was definitely in elementary school, but this text always stood with me. If God is the creator of both the spiritual and physical realm, and what he says cannot be a lie, then what we find in the physical realm can't be a lie either and can't contradict the spiritual.
I mean, that works for me. But I'll tell you that you beat me by a number of years, because if you weren't in high school and you already accepted evolution, I went into high school being a young earth creationist. I was that kid who raised my hand and kind of argued a little bit with my freshman year biology professor. So I'm 14, and my biology teacher was saying, like, who here thinks that, like, dinosaurs and men lived side by side? And I raised my hand, and he's like, Kevin, why do you think that? And I'm like, well, they found dinosaur bones right next to, like, human bones. And he's like, no, they didn't. And I was like, yes, they did. So it wasn't until I think I was probably 15 or so, like it was early on in high school, when I became convinced that evolution was false. That evolution was true. That young earth creationism was false. But I absolutely went into high school thinking that it was that evolution was false, because I was that kid in my class. And a lot of that has to do with the way that I was raised, because our textbooks we bought, and you'll get a kick out of this, the textbooks that we used at like this like kind of the school that I went to, my graduating 8th grade class was 4 kids. It was essentially a homeschool co-op when you think about it, but it was at the church, so it wasn't at any of our homes. But the brand of textbooks that we used were Abeka. If those don't sound familiar to you, it's because they're not Catholic. They are evangelical. They are an evangelical brand of homeschool textbooks. And those are the science textbooks and the math textbooks that we use at my traditionalist Catholic school. And if that doesn't speak to horseshoe theory, then I don't know what does.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've done way too much agreeing. This has been way too pleasant. And obviously I'm kidding. But I wouldn't mind pressing you a little bit on some specific, and this will be like apologetics related, but instead of apologetics kind of writ large, now we can kind of drill down, I guess, in a few areas if you're cool with that.
Yeah.
But we were talking about evolution, and I did a like 45 or maybe an hour long video with actually a lawyer friend of mine. Her name is Rosemary. And she, because she's a lawyer, she knows a lot about like the history of law. And so we were doing the Scopes monkey trial and all that stuff, kind of like a deep dive on, and it's funny because the main biologist on the side of like keeping young earth creationism out of school was Catholic. Just, you know, to give props to the Catholic Church. The guy was the guy arguing for evolution was Catholic, and the people arguing against it by and large were evangelical Protestants. But regardless, there's one area that I think that the church is kind of in a pickle. And let me explain it to you and then get your take on it. So the church has allowed for a decent amount of negotiation with the text of Genesis to the point where like Adam and Eve don't have to be literally like the first like humanoid things that existed. It's totally cool that they evolved from humanoid ancestors. But it seems important to the Catholic Church that Adam and Eve did indeed exist, and not only that they did exist, but that all of us are descended from them. And that seems problematic to me because modern science seems to suggest that there was never fewer than a couple thousand of us. So what is the apologetic response there? Or at least, let me not even, what is your response there? I won't make you speak for the church as a whole.
No, so this is my understanding of it, and it all goes back to Aquinas, just like everything does. But Aquinas talks about that, you know, for a physical creature, like humans are physical creatures with a rational soul. So what does it mean to be a physical creature without a rational soul? Well, you're not human, right? So a Homo sapien, which is our species, that doesn't have a rational soul wouldn't be considered a human being in the eyes of the Catholic Church, even if the scientific community identifies it as a human being, because they don't have that rational soul aspect within their understanding. And so the way that I understand it is you had the evolutionary line, and then you had Homo sapiens appear. Within that species of Homo sapiens, God elected two of them, a man and a woman, and infused a rational soul within them. And then the fall happened, and then what ended up happening was they and their offspring, or I should say their offspring, intermingled with the non-rational Homo sapiens to produce more human beings. And I've done research on it where we're more interconnected than you would think. That within the scientific community, there is something called most recent common ancestor, where at that point, everyone that existed within that period is related to everyone existing today. And that occurs 3,000 years ago.
For women, it occurs 3,000 years ago, right? And
all of mankind. So you're thinking of this is different
mitochondrial
than the
Eve.
Yeah, that's different than the mitochondrial Eve. This has to do with something specifically called the most recent common ancestors, which is different from the mitochondrial Eve, which is the most common ancestor, I believe is what it is. But regardless, so the mitochondrial Eve is the woman from which everyone is related to. Let me see, because I actually have it pulled up, and I can get it over, but this is done through Yale University. These more realistic models estimate that the most recent common ancestor of mankind lived as recently as about 3,000 years ago, and the identical ancestor's point was as recent as several thousand years ago. So this has more to do with a grouping of people more than what Adam and Eve are. But if by 3,000 years ago, everyone was related to everyone that currently exists.
I believe that for if we wanted to go back to the point where we are descended from everybody, we only have to go back to like the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Because if you go like, so you have two, you're descended from two people to the power of
then
X.
Yep.
Exactly. And so if you go back 30 generations, I actually looked up a thing on it. So 2 to the power of 30 is just north of 1 billion. There were fewer than 1 billion people living in like the 14th century or whatever. So everybody who existed in the 14th century is your great 30 times grandparents.
Yes.
All of them.
Yep.
And that's true of everybody on Earth.
Yes.
But that doesn't have anything to do with Adam or Eve or anything, because that's just that's just how populations
numbers
work.
work. Yeah.
Right.
So what I'm getting at with that is when you look at the history of civilization and the history of, not necessarily of man, but specifically of civilization, and you look at the way that like you said, the math works and everything else like that. The Garden of Eden is said to be somewhere between 4 different rivers, which originates within the Fertile Crescent. Now, I know that we've had civilizations in China at around that came a little bit after, like pretty close after to that. But like the earliest civilizations, to my understanding, occurred within the Fertile Crescent area, which is where Adam and Eve were said to have existed. So they and their children went out, and that's where we started getting the farming and the cities, and instead of just hanging out in the caves. You had the starting points of modern day civilization. Now, the other aspect of it is to me, it doesn't matter whether where Adam and Eve were 6,000 years ago or 30,000 years ago. All the church is saying is that there had to have been an Adam and an Eve.
Not only that there has to be an Adam and Eve, though, if I'm correct, but that we are all descended from both of them, because that's how original sin is disseminated, right? Through Adam and Eve's sin. And I think that the problem is that modern science would tell us that we are not all descended from two people who lived roughly 6,000 years ago.
That's the thing. The church doesn't say Adam and Eve had to have lived 6,000 years ago.
Sure, but almost no matter how you look at it, there's a problem. Like whether it's 6, whether it's 30.
And the second issue is obviously the inbreeding question, right? And that's why the church also hasn't stated that Adam and Eve were the only Homo sapiens.
Well, they would have been the only Homo sapiens at the time that they lived, because Homo sapien specifically refers to that group, but with an infused rational soul. And so, like Adam and Eve, their parents you wouldn't be able to tell a difference between them, except that Adam and Eve had souls and their parents didn't. Right.
So that's what I was getting at. So, like you were talking about, like there were never less than a few thousand Homo sapiens, right?
Mm-hmm.
So within the few thousand of Homo sapiens, 2 of them got a rational soul, and then they had descendants, until eventually there was only Homo sapiens with rational souls, and the ones that didn't died out.
but we don't. So modern science doesn't think that we are all directly, like we can all go back directly to Adam and Eve. That's not what modern science thinks, and to me, that's the issue. The issue is that it doesn't seem like it's the case, or if we are to believe modern scientists, that all of us are descended from any two individuals, ever.
So my understanding of it, and I could be completely wrong, but my understanding of it is like the mitochondrial Eve. Everyone, like, because she predates the mitochondrial Adam.
Yeah.
Everyone is descended from her.
Yes, and she lived like 200,000 years ago or something crazy like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's what I'm getting at, though, is it doesn't matter how long ago the Adam and Eve were. All the church requires is that there was an Adam and Eve. So if there was a mitochondrial Eve, and the mitochondrial Adam, like I said, is much more recent, but everyone came from her, and if everyone came from her, it also came from the individual that she bore children with. The scientific explanation of the mitochondrial Eve and the mitochondrial Adam has to do with genetics and the fact that we can trace earlier to a male chromosome than to a female chromosome. Has to do with the genetics, and the picking of the Eve and Adam name is, unfortunately, in my opinion, causing more confusion than necessary. But the point being is that we can trace ourselves back to at least where a time in history we had to have everyone came from this individual. And all the church has stated is that it doesn't matter how far back in history we have to go, there had to have been that individual, which science does say occurred, even if genetically it's at two different points that they're concerned about, whereas the church is concerned about something different. The thing that the church has to say is just we all came from the same two individuals, which is why we all have the guilt of sin. Science has stated we have come at least from one individual. So the only disagreement comes from when you're arguing against the evangelical interpretation of the 6,000 years, that Adam and Eve had to have lived 6,000 years ago. Now, you'll have some Catholics who are like, no, evolution is correct, and then Adam and Eve were 6,000 years ago. I'm not a part of that camp, because it doesn't matter when Adam and Eve existed. What matters is that they existed.
Yeah. So, Pope Pius XII in Humani Generis, and I'm just going to read this.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding the apparent inconsistency of Adam and Eve just being symbols. So,
yeah.
like this. So, hey, Pope Pius XII, are Adam and Eve just symbols? And here's Pope Pius's response.
Yeah.
It is in no way apparent how such an opinion can be reconciled with that which the sources of revealed truth and the documents of the teaching authority of the church propose with regard to original sin, which proceeds from a sin actually committed by an individual Adam, and which, through generation, is passed on to all in its everyone as his own.
Yep.
So that would appear to be the rejection of polygenism, which is the belief that we are descended from multiple sets of parents instead of individuals. So it seems to me, and I'll be interested to see if you agree or disagree, it seems to me that the Catholic is committed to rejecting polygenism.
Yes.
Okay. And my main problem, I guess, with this stance is that polygenism seems to be true. Like, modern science is saying, no, polygenism is indeed true. Mitochondrial Adam and mitochondrial Eve existed tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years apart from each other. There are no two individuals from which we are all descended. And Pope Pius XII's 1950 encyclical Humani Generis seems to commit the Catholic to the rejection of this
Yeah.
position. And that's my main concern, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So and I could be misunderstanding what it means to be the mitochondrial Adam and the mitochondrial Eve, but my understanding of it is, so let's use the Adam example. You go back everyone's lineage, and then you get to this point, and this man is the ancestor of all of humanity. And then you can still keep going back, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So even though this is the point where they all converge, he's not the Catholic Church's Adam.
He can't be, in the sense that polygenism is still true even with a mitochondrial Adam, because it's not like mitochondrial Adam and mitochondrial Eve are the two from which we are all descended. No, mitochondrial Adam had a whole bunch of different partners. Mitochondrial Eve had a whole bunch of different partners, but those two were not linked up.
So, and that's what I was getting at, is because of the time difference. However, so that's what I was getting at, though, is like if you keep going back, so you have the mitochondrial Adam. Well, wouldn't his father also then be related or the descendant of every existing human? Like his biological father?
Yes, but mitochondrial Adam is the most recent person from whom we are all descended. Yeah.
Yes, and that's the key word, most recent. The church isn't concerned with who is the most recent person that we can point to. The church just says at some point in history, everyone came from these two. And so if you keep going back, which I don't know, like maybe we can one day, but if you keep going back, eventually you'll find that point where everyone did come from these two. Right now what we've done is we said this is the earliest point at which we've converged, and then the divergent where we then started to diverge, and this is the earliest point on the female side where their genetic code started to diverge as well. But we haven't gone all the way back to the origin. So science is talking about the most recent point of convergence, and the church is talking about the origin of all.
Yeah, so I guess scientists would kind of say, well, there is no origin, in the sense that like there's no first human, like and that to me, that's kind of a different topic, I guess. But speciation also seems to be a problem. Like I think that speciation is a problem for people who want to hold to this kind of like robust realist idea of, and Catholics kind of seem obligated to believe in some kind of like species realism.
So you want to know a fun fact?
Yeah, I love fun facts.
There are so first off, the Vatican has a section devoted to astronomy. And there are theologians within that observatory who will talk about the possibility of alien life and whether or not they need to be baptized.
Jimmy Akin loves that stuff.
Yes. So because if they are like intelligent alien life, then they would be a rational creature or a physical creature with a rational soul. Therefore, human being. One of my favorite theories on it is the reason why we are isolated so much so, like an answer to the Fermi paradox, the reason why we are so isolated is because we are the only human species that God had created that sinned. And so we are in quarantine.
I mean, that's a fun theory. It's just a theory, though, I'm sure. Like, you don't really... Yeah. But hey, no, I think that's cool. That sounds like something that you could write like a whole book about. You know what I mean? Like a...
C.S. Lewis did.
Oh, I haven't read... So the only Lewis that I've read is obviously Chronicles of Narnia, but then I've also read Screw Tape Letters and Mere Christianity. That's it. I haven't read his... What is his sci-fi series called?
I forget what it is, but he did write a book exploring that.
Yes. I haven't... People tell me that I have to read it because apparently it's just wild. Like...
I read the first book and... What the wildest thing was when he was describing the spaceship, I woke up on the floor and I looked and the corners were at right angles, and then I looked up and then they curved outward. You know, he's trying to describe a non-Euclidean geometry in a what really, like, if you were to extend the right angles here on Earth and just extended it out, you'd see that they aren't in parallel to each other. They go away from each other, and so he's describing that in a spaceship.
That's kind of cool.
So yeah,
Yeah, I've heard that they're super weird because like all of a sudden he starts talking about like the demon of what is he like all of a sudden out of the middle of nowhere there comes like the demon of like lesbianism or something like that, like in the third book or
like I
something.
said, I only read the first book, and while it was interesting, it didn't like capture my attention like some of his other works.
Yeah.
So I didn't read beyond that. So
Yeah.
that's because I know there was like 3 books in that series, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Yeah. Hey, complete change of pace, but I wanted to talk to you about hell because we've talked
Okay.
about hell on Reddit I think before, but um I grew up in a kind of Catholic culture where we talked about the fewness of the saved, and we kind of thought that very few people in general were going to go to
Mhm.
heaven, like even among Catholics. Frankly, we really looked down upon our Novus Ordo cousins because we thought that you know, everybody in heaven
Yeah.
is pretty much going to be trad, and not even all trad's going to get there because of how difficult it is.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, you have like the Bishop Barons who describe themselves as like hopeful universalists. So I guess my question for you, just to start us off, is what is your view of hell? What's acceptable within Catholicism?
Mhm.
And also, I know that you have spent a lot of time thinking about hell. So why have you spent so much time thinking about hell? What about that speaks to you? So that was a lot, but go ahead and take it
Yeah.
further.
So the way that I approach my faith and the way that I approach apologetics is very much almost kind of the same way that the church herself approaches issues. Like she doesn't define something until it's under attack. She doesn't put something into dogma until it's under attack. And so I didn't really start thinking about hell and really looking into it until Bishop Aaron, and funnily enough,
Hmm.
where he was coming to visit the seminary one day, and people started talking about, oh my gosh, I can't believe he's coming because can you believe what he said about hell? You
Oh,
know,
like negatively? Like,
like
oh
there were several
no.
people in the seminary that were very upset about it, and I'm like, well, what are y'all talking about? Show me. And so they showed me the video that he was talking on, and I'm listening to it, and I did my own research afterwards, and I too am in the Bishop Barron camp. Now, I will say that one must be careful with that to avoid encouraging a sort of lackadaisical approach to sin, because sin is real and sin is dangerous. But I love the way that he words it because it's a hope, and it's less of a description of how many people are in hell and how many people, you know, percentage wise. Like it gets away from trying to figure out the percentages, and it gets into what the focus actually should be. And the way that I describe his view is because he gets into, you know, in his videos on like how, you know, you can't pray for something that's hopeless, and we pray that everyone might be saved, you know, and that all souls may go to heaven, and you know, and all of these things. I just get it to this: hell is defined in the Catholic Church in the Catechism as primarily a state of separation from God. Now, could fire be involved in all these other things? Yes, absolutely. But what it primarily is and what it's describing is a state of separation. Not physically, per se, but as far as like your, like in a relationship, you can be in a room with someone, but you are still, as far as the relationship is concerned, separated from them, even if you are in their physical presence. That's the type of separation the church is talking about. Not necessarily a physical one, just full-blown relationship-wise. And who decides whether you are separated from an individual or not? Well, obviously you, right? So if each individual is responsible and able to determine whether they want to be in that relationship with God or not, and each person has been given the sufficient grace necessary to accept that gift of relationship with God, to the point where it is possible for each individual to pick yes, then wouldn't it be possible for every individual to actually pick yes? It's kind of like if I was to ask you, hey, if I was to, a more of an extreme example, Kevin, if you were to flip a coin 50,000 times, is it possible for it to always land heads?
Yes, it is possible.
Is it likely?
No.
No. So is it possible that all might be saved? Yes. And the key difference between what Bishop Barron talks about, which the Universalists talk about, and what I think a lot of the people who are being uncharitable towards Bishop Barron talk about, is the hope for the possibility isn't affirming that it will happen.
Right.
One of my favorite posts that I ever did was when I was defending Bishop Barron, and I did it in an almost, Summa Theologica, objection 1, objection 2. And this came to me, and I'm never going to let this go, because I believe it's so true, and it is the key to understanding this position. There are two aspects to hope: to desire something that will happen, and to desire something to happen. So on the one hand, you have it where you're waiting for an anticipation of something that will happen. So to use Catholic terminology, that is the hope of the second coming. We know that will happen. The hope of an empty hell is the hope of the second kind, where it's hoping something to happen, much like one hopes to get a raise in their new job.
The former might not even be hope, understanding hope in a kind of colloquial sense, where it means like if hope colloquially maybe implies uncertainty, and Catholics are not at all uncertain about whether or not there will be a second coming. Catholics are certain about that. So in a colloquial, and I know that the word hope can mean different, but in a colloquial sense, maybe the former is not even hope, and the latter is hope, right?
Yeah.
I agree that people are unfair to Bishop Barron in that regard, and I like to think that I'm impartial. But I think that Bishop Barron is pretty clear when he says that he's a hopeful universalist and not a universalist simplicator. Like, he never says like, oh yeah, I think everyone's saved. He's just saying, I hope, which I think is very different.
And that's what the Catholic faith is. And the thing that a lot of people, get hung up on is the idea of, the church, or I'm sorry, God forces people into hell, and that God is the reason why people are in hell. And this gets into the distinction between double and single predestination, which is a huge, deep theological discussion that in and of itself deserves a whole 2-hour discussion on its own. But to summarize and put it into simple terms, one of the realizations that I had on the subject fairly recently was the church has talked about because people get confused as far as like, well, what would happen if God didn't pick someone to go to heaven that wanted to go to heaven? Well, the church has talked about the limbo of the fathers, where you had people that didn't want to go to hell and weren't deserving of hell, but because the sacrifice of Christ hadn't happened, they weren't in heaven and couldn't be in heaven. So the way that it works without God's grace is you either go to hell or you go to limbo. That is our power. That is what we are in control of. What God does is he picks people to be the elect. And there's conversations as far as like whether he foreknows how they would respond to his grace or not. And there's two traditions within that. I am of the tradition where God knows how you would respond and reacts accordingly to your action. Like the way that I best describe it is like, you have people who say that God gave Mary the gift of being born without the stain of original or conceived without the stain of original sin because he knew she would say yes. And you have people who say that she said yes because she was conceived without the stain of original sin. Both are accepted within the Catholic Church. And you can have a similar approach to predestination as well. But what is in our power and our control is hell or limbo. And then God takes those who would have gone to limbo and elevates them out of it. So that's what God does. It's not God taking people into heaven and then sending people away. No, we picked effectively limbo or hell, and God takes us out of limbo.
I want to tee up a question for you that I'm hoping is easy, but we'll see what you think.
Mm-hmm.
So I constantly tell people, if I die and I get to the pearly white gates and St. Peter's like, Kevin, you made a huge mistake, dude. Like, the Catholic Church was the one true church this whole time, and you were you were terribly mistaken. But I'm offering you another, like, this is your post-mortem choice. Do you choose? My answer is like, are you kidding me? Like, pure goodness itself, like, I completely misunderstood what pure goodness was, but now that I see it, man, that's an easy decision. I'm picking pure goodness.
Yeah.
And according to Aquinas, actually, it would be impossible for me not to pick pure goodness, because Aquinas thinks that freedom simply is the power to choose the good, and like the thief thinks that thievery is good in the moment, at least, and that's why, like, the thief doesn't steal things because the thief thinks that it's bad. The thief sees the good that he'll get from stealing the thing, and that's why he does it. So if Aquinas is right about free will, I will have no choice but to accept God. And then almost that's like hard universalism. Not going there though. Do you believe in that kind of post-mortem choice, or do you believe that our wills are fixed upon death?
It's both is the way I'm going to describe it. And this is another like area that I have a lot of fun talking on and studying on. So, we are creatures of change. And because of that, we're able to fail, repent, come back, fail, repent, come back, fail. You know, we're able to do that for as long as we're around and still a creature of change. But our soul and our relationship to God is being formed by the choices we make on earth. Now, as you said, like, as Aquinas puts it, our free will is disposition towards the good. And the reason why the thief steals and makes the wrong choice is because to him right now, whatever he's stealing is that good. So here on earth, you are forming and orienting yourself towards what your good is. You
may be mistaken about what's good for you, but you're chasing some kind of good, even if you're mistaken about what is really good.
Sort of. So you had mentioned, like, you had read Mere Christianity. Have you read The Great Divorce?
No, and that is one that everybody's on my case about having to read.
Yes.
I don't know if you're like into the whole Catholic YouTube thing, but Father John Brown. Father Brown is he's got his own.
I've heard of him. I will tell you this: the only Catholic YouTube priest that I even somewhat follow is one that I studied with. His name is Father David Michael Moses.
Oh, that's cool.
Yes.
But Father Brown, he's a Jesuit, but he's not a. He'll be the first one to criticize Jesuits for what he thinks. You know, regardless. That's almost that's way.
Yes.
I told Father Brown that I would read The Great Divorce, and I still haven't read it because I'm an awful person, and there's no getting around that. I'm going to read it one day. I really am. It's just my reading list grows perpetually longer by the day.
So the reason why I bring that up is because in it, this is another scene of C.S. Lewis's that just sticks in your, for me at least, sticks in my brain. You have a mother. Her son died when he was very young. Age isn't given, but from the way it's told, maybe like 4 years old. Well, she's walking this path towards heaven, and the way that I don't know how familiar you are with it, but the way C.S. Lewis describes it is people are getting off this bus. They're in this world that is too real for them, so the grass doesn't even bend under their feet. because they're not real enough to affect it. So the grass is piercing their feet as they're walking. But she's on this way towards the mountain where they feel this compulsion towards, and they know that that's where they're supposed to be going to. And everyone that's on this journey is met by a person from their past. In this case, she's met by her, if I want to say it was her brother, but some family member of hers. But it wasn't her son. And she was angry at that and wanted to know, why didn't God send my son to me? Is he, is my son not here? And her brother responds, no, your son is here. He's waiting for you, up there. Well, why didn't God give me my son? And the brother responds, because you have put your son in place of God. Like, in order to get to where your son needs to be, your son needs to not be the most important thing in your life. God needs to be the most important thing in your life. And at that point, it's not going to be a case of like where you'll care if you see your son or not, because you'll see your son and you'll be there with your son, but you got to give up this desire that is consuming you of seeing your son, because it's unhealthy for you, because it consumed everything that you were and caused you to cut off me, cut off everyone else in your family, including your other living children.
Sure. I mean, I can appreciate the need for a mother to be there for her other children, certainly.
Yeah.
But the idea of giving up a desire to see your son again, that seems kind of messed up.
So what he's getting at isn't giving up the love of your son. He's not talking about that. What he's talking about, though, is a restructuring of a priority. Her son became God, to the point where she was willing to basically kidnap her son away from God and stick him in hell with her. That's not healthy either.
I don't know. To me, that speaks of the love of a mother that, so I've said this in my videos before. Aquinas writes that if there's a mother who loves her son very much, but her son commits a mortal sin, he eats meat on a Friday and then instantly dies. That son's going to hell. Mom's going to heaven. When mom gets to heaven, she will realize how wicked her son is, and she will rejoice that he's being tortured forever. And and let me kind of tie the knot on that. To me, if you asked me, like, Kevin, and it's so funny because my parents will say the same thing. My parents are still devout traditionalist Catholics, by the way. But I will say, if I found myself in heaven and my wife was in hell, I would be banging at the doors of heaven, trying to get out of heaven and throw myself into hell to be with my wife because I love her. And I think if I didn't do that, I think that would be some kind of deficit on my part.
So that gets into the misconception that people have on what the nature of hell is, because they think that the people in hell want to get out of hell.
Oh, and this is where we're going to wind up disagreeing. So sorry, go ahead. Let me not interrupt you rudely. Yeah. But
the way that this goes is, or the way that I like to explain is, have you ever encountered someone that is destroying either themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, or in their relationships?
Of course. We all know somebody who struggled with drugs of some kind, yeah.
Or whatever. Right. It doesn't even need to be drugs. It can be anything, just like...
everybody knows somebody who's got... Yeah, for sure.
And you want to help them, right? But if they don't want you to help them, can you help them?
Me? Probably not, because I'm not all-powerful.
Yeah. So that's the thing, though, is these are people who don't want to be in a relationship with God. So can you force someone to be in a relationship with you?
No, I cannot.
Okay. And are you a good being if you could force someone into a relationship with you, forcing them into a relationship that they didn't want?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So it's a harsh truth, but the way that I like to and fortunate, unfortunate, however you want to look at it. So I'm the oldest of 5 children. one of my brothers did not feel like he could question things, but that was a choice he made of himself. He didn't like making waves, so he never questioned anything. I didn't mind making waves, so I questioned everything. So he left the church. In fact, so much so that he practically has disowned my parents. Like, doesn't want anything to do with them. My mom is still there waiting for him to come back home. Not to the Catholic faith, just to her. Be back in a relationship with her. Be back in that loving embrace with her. But he doesn't want that. So she's just going to wait and not force herself onto him. And God is a similar way. Now,
I disagree.
Go ahead.
So I don't think that God is similar at all to any of us.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, as Aquinas says, we can only speak in analogies when we talk about God. And if God truly is all powerful, and if God is truly all good, then I think that he could convince any of us that he really is all good. He could remove the barriers that are blocking our intellect from recognizing his all goodness. And if he did, then we would all willingly, not by force, we would willingly join him. And and if he loved us, he would do that.
So there is one. So like you are correct in everything up into our response to that. And I will explain why. Satan and the Legion of Demons also had all of the barriers removed. They had everything. They saw the glory of God. They saw everything and understood everything. Have you ever read Paradise Lost by John Milton?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so he does a phenomenal job of exploring Satan's psyche. So much so that people called him an ally of Satan because they thought he was secretly a devil worshiper because of how accurate his unveiling of Satan's psyche was. And ultimately what it is Satan knows that God is all good and all great and all of these things, and Satan isn't. But Satan wants to be. As the way that my teacher on the book described it, Satan knows that God is a difference of kind, but he wants to believe that it's a difference of degree. If only I had one more demon that could help me. If only I had one, type situation.
Do you reject Aquinas' definition of free will? Because I do too, for the record. I also reject, but I didn't assume that you did, but maybe you do. So Aquinas' view of free will was just the ability to choose the good. So if you had perfect knowledge of what was truly good and what was truly bad, you would unfailingly choose the good, according to Aquinas.
So my understanding of how Aquinas defined free will is the ability to choose the good, and that it is a tool meant for us to choose the good. It doesn't mean that we will always choose the good, because if our free will and our knowledge of what the good is, which is the point that I was trying to get to earlier, if our free will is devoted to something that isn't God, it's still going to be pointed towards something that is good. But because God's no longer in the picture, that's when it becomes disordered. So, like Aquinas even talks about how Satan himself, by existing, it does have some good in him merely by the fact that he is a creation of God, and God can only create good. Now, to put this into perspective, like you were talking about, man, that seems harsh for the mother who is loving her child, which is good. Yes, you are correct. She is picking a good. What's happened, though, is she's picked that good over the greater good. It's almost like the trolley problem on a cosmic scale. Do you pull the lever to kill the one, or do you leave the lever alone and kill the five? This is about picking the ultimate good. And here on earth, we are working on ourselves on choosing the good, choosing the good, choosing the good, rightly so, then when we do see that ultimate good, we're able to pick that over a lesser good. As I mean, you said you read the Screwtape letter. Says Uncle Screwtape says you don't get someone to hell by making them do a 180. All you got to do is shift it slightly.
Yeah. Do you think that somebody's will is fixed upon death?
Yes, but that doesn't mean that we know what that fixed will is.
Sure, that's fine. Who is fixing that person's will?
The lack of time. And on the agenda, you had made that comment. It's like, wait a minute, like, we're kind of in like this infinite, eternal time already because we're getting moment after moment after moment after moment after moment after moment. And what people don't understand often, eternity isn't infinite time.
It's no time at all?
It is no time at all.
How is that different than not existing?
So, because God is existence qua existence, is unchanging, and if time is the measurement of change, then God exists as existence qua existence with no time.
What's the difference between something existing for no time at all versus something that does not exist? Because it seems to me like you can imagine some person named Blevin, where he's very similar to Kevin, but he has 3 eyes or something, right? So Blevin does not exist, right? So it seems to me like I could say both Blevin does not exist and Blevin exists for no time at all. Those seem to be the same thing.
If you want to get into like the classical definitions of existence, yes, Blevin exists. What's been going on is we as a society have moved towards a more materialistic and imperialistic use of language. But in the classical use of language, as soon as you conceive of Blevin, Blevin exists. Because you can't conceive of nothing.
At least the thought of Blevin exists.
Yeah. Yes. Now, so there's scales of existence in classical theism and in the world that Aquinas comes from and how the church tends to understand it. You have existing as concept. You have existing like we are. God is the level beyond that. So that's why you see so often in literature for the church where when it's talking about death, it compares it to childbirth. Because what's real and existing for the child in the womb, they have no way of understanding what that looks like outside of the womb. So, you know, when you ask me, hey, what does it look like to exist without time and to not exist at all? The only way that I can answer that, because I don't have a good answer, but the only way that I can answer it is the present moment. C.S. Lewis is big. If you've read his, Mere Christianity and Screwtape letters, you know he's big and talks about how the present moment is the closest that any one of us is going to have that understanding of eternity. Because eternity is the eternal now. There's no more future. There's no more past. It's just the now. And so when the will is fixed, it's fixed by the choices you made in this time. So to use, again, you as the example, you're on, the way I like to describe it is, you're on this quest to discern, to understand and learn what truth is, right? You didn't leave the Catholic Church because of ego. You left because of humility and you desired truth.
I like to think so anyway.
Yes, but that's what you're orienting yourself towards. Now, let's say you died in a car accident tomorrow. But if you were to continue for another 40 years, eventually your journey to truth would have led you back to the church. But it was cut short by that car accident tomorrow, right? God, who's all-knowing, knows your heart and knows that your heart was oriented towards that goal. that would have eventually led you back. And your will was oriented towards that. So upon your death, you would see God and say, my Lord and my God, and move on in this hypothetical. Versus someone who left the Catholic Church because of their ego. Because the rules are too hard. I don't want to do those rules. I'm going to do my own thing. Now their will is oriented towards themselves, not towards God. Now, we're a created being of God, so we're a good, right? Again, going back to Aquinas' will being a picking of the good. So they're picking the good that's in themselves. And then when they die, they're still oriented towards themselves. And they've placed themselves so high within their own worldview that they're not willing to lower themselves to make room for God.
Yeah, I mean, so this might sound flippant, and I don't mean it to be flippant, but I guess if there is no time at all in the afterlife, then I'm just not overly concerned about the afterlife. Because literally 100% of my time existing is just this. And then my time is up and there is no time at all after I'm dead. That's kind of okay then. I guess I'm not overly concerned about it if there's literally no time at all.
You want to know something? That's basically what Jesus said as well. Don't worry about the tomorrow. Don't worry about what comes next.
Jesus wasn't saying don't worry about the afterlife.
Yeah.
He was saying like God's going to take care of you.
Yeah.
The birds don't worry. The flowers of the field don't worry.
If you pay attention to like the parables and things that he's talking about, like the women waiting for the groom, they took the preparations today. They lived in the now, they lived in the present, and they did the present because tomorrow wasn't promised. They didn't worry about the tomorrow. They didn't worry about what was come next because they were always prepared today. So your language of like, so I'm just not going to worry about the afterlife. Yes, that's the right method. Worry about your relationship, as a Catholic, worry about your relationship with God today. What was it? And it just slipped my mind.
Well, maybe what I can do is this. Not only am I not worried about it, but heaven doesn't seem very good if it exists for no time at all. Like, so you're telling me that there's you get to, and if I told you that I'm going to give you $1 million at for no time at all, you get to have $1 million. You would be like, thanks for nothing, I guess. Like,
so the confusion that a lot of people get is they're looking at time as an existing thing. Do inches exist?
Do inches exist?
Yeah.
So you're talking to a nominalist, so I would say no. I hope that's the answer you're going for. Okay, good.
That is the answer I'm going for, because no, they don't. They exist only so far as a way for us to measure space. Time is a measurement of change.
Correct.
That's why in the theory of with the theory of relativity, someone moving faster, they experience less change. So we say that time moves slower for them. That's also why you have the Andromeda paradox of like, when is now? With I think it's the B theory of time or block theory of time. We have different ways of measuring time, just like we have different ways of measuring space. So we, as temporal creatures of the third dimension or fourth dimension, we don't understand what it looks like to not be bound by time, to exist in the fifth, sixth, whatever dimension. We don't know what that looks like. We can't even begin to understand it. We can't even begin to fathom it. So the incredulity and the this doesn't make sense because our understanding of time is blah blah blah. My answer to that is exactly. our understanding of time. We don't know what that looks like, and we can't even begin to process it. It's why we don't know what a 4D shape looks like. We don't know what it looks like to move through time the way that we move through space. We don't know what any of that looks like. And to me, that's okay.
Sure. So, I mean, I'm okay with the idea of there are some things that we just can't know.
Yeah.
But, something that does occur to me is that, the act of reflecting, the
Yep.
act of thinking, right? The act of praising, the act of doing, all of these different things require time, right? You are not actually praising anything if nothing is changing, right?
Aristotle in his Metaphysics talks about thought thinking itself. And as Catholics, we got super excited when we stumbled upon that. Because I don't know how familiar you are with the Trinity terminology, where you have the Father, was considering himself, viewing himself, so to speak. And that thought was so perfect.
It
was
eternally begets his Son.
Yeah.
And then the relationship between the Son and the Father is the Holy Ghost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that, and again, this goes back to like what Aquinas was saying, as far as like, when we talk about understanding or thinking or pondering or any of these actions and attributes that we attribute to God, we do it as an analogy. It's the same thing for us when we are with God and in eternity.
Well,
where
we'll have our bodies again at the end of time.
And that is another mystery. Yes, absolutely. And I'm still trying to understand, like, well, what does it mean for a physical body to be in a non-temporal space? What does it mean for, the new heaven and the new earth? What do these things mean? And I'm still studying and I'm still learning. And that is kind of where the limit of my knowledge on that particular subject is at this point in time.
And let's also not forget that Orthodox Catholic teaching is such that the human person is the unity of body and soul. So when I'm gonna pick on you have a great grandma and her name was Betty. When Betty died, she went to heaven, and well, did she go to heaven? Kind of. Her soul is in heaven, but her body is still here on earth, assuming that she wasn't assumed into heaven. I assume that Great Aunt Betty was not assumed into heaven.
That's a safe assumption,
okay,
yes.
Great, we're on the same page. But that would mean that in some sense, Betty is not in heaven. Betty's soul is in heaven right now.
Yeah.
But at the end of time, Betty's body and soul will be reunited in heaven, and that's when we can, fully say Betty is in heaven. And I find this to be particularly troubling for.
Well, I just remembered what I wanted to say. I don't know if you remember the Baltimore Catechism, the little
I had to memorize it when I was younger.
Okay. I did too. You might remember then that when it was talking about the sainthood, and this is in the Catechism of the Catholic Church still, where when we talk about someone being canonized as a saint, these are individuals that we, because we talk about what does it mean to be in heaven? Well, it's to be in union with the communion of saints and behold the beatific vision. Mm-hmm. To be canonized a saint is an individual that we believe not only is currently experiencing that right now, but achieved that on earth as well. And
didn't have the beatific vision on earth.
Well, so that's the thing is that it seems to allude to it now. Because, like
James,
you said,
I'm having connectivity issues. I'm so sorry. Can I ask you to repeat?
She doesn't have eyes to see. Oh,
sorry.
Yes, you're okay. So, just like you were saying, like great Aunt Betty is not in her body's not in heaven right now. Only her soul is. Yet the church still states she is having the beatific vision, but how can she have it if she doesn't have eyes to see?
Right, and the beatific vision right now for Great Aunt Betty is not literally vision. It's just her soul somehow is aware of the presence of God.
And and you can have that here on earth too.
Not in the same way that you could have it in heaven. And here I am, the non-Catholic, telling the Catholic what the Catholic Church teaches. So I should probably do some Googling on the side. I'm fairly certain that canonization does not mean that somebody had the beatific vision while on earth, right?
So that is, like I said, from the Baltimore Catechism that I remember, and if I remember correctly, this Catechism of the Catholic Church even today still supports that. But it talks about how these are people that are currently experiencing it and had experienced it. Now, this doesn't mean that they saw heaven like in the way that Thomas Aquinas did that caused him to burn all of his writings.
Yeah.
It's more to do, like you were talking about, like the awareness in their soul. And it's why, and I forget what his name is, but we just recently had someone canonized as a saint recently. And
the kid who died of cancer in 2006. I forget his name.
Yes. It's even though like why like his only quote unquote name to fame, when I was trying to share this with someone, I was like, oh, so what you're telling me that the only thing that I need to do to be a saint now is to just make a list of all of these miracles? And it's like, no, that's not what happened. When you look at his life and his life story, he had such a closeness and connection with the divine that he had that awareness of the divine spiritually, even while still on earth. Now, does that mean that they went straight to heaven? No. Because I remember reading a story of another saint, and all of these stories get all mixed up, and so I don't remember any of the saints' names. I know you can relate a little bit because you said you grew up reading a bunch of the saints as well.
Oh, yeah.
But there were two saints that were friends, and I was reading a biography of one of them. And the priest happened to have passed away. And she's going around telling everyone, what are you doing? Pray for his soul, pray for his soul, pray for his soul, pray for his soul. And then about 10 minutes later, she says, why are you still crying? He's in heaven with God and everyone else. Celebrate. And her mother superior came over and is like, are you trying to imply that this holy man was in purgatory for even 5 minutes? And she's like, well, yeah. Like I felt when he left. So this is not the church saying that these people went straight to heaven upon their death. Let me be very clear on that. But one can still have that awareness and still need time in purgatory.
Do you remember where in the CCC you saw that? And
like I said, it was the Baltimore Catechism, and I remember seeing it in passing.
I'm gonna change the screen real quick, and it's possible that we're gonna lose either of our audio. So give me 1 second.
Mm-hmm. I can hear you just fine. Oh, okay.
Oop. Okay, so I put it up on the screen. I know that nobody could hear me there, but if the audience is super interested, you can pause the screen there, and I'll read it out loud now. So I don't know if you were thinking, and so by the way, this is not the Baltimore Catechism. This is the CCC, but the CCC entry 828 says, by canonizing some of the faithful, as in by solemnly proclaiming that they practiced heroic virtue and lived in fidelity with God's grace, the church recognizes the power of the spirit of holiness within her and sustains the hopes of believers by proposing the saints as models and intercessors. The saints have always been the source and origin of renewal in the most difficult moments of church history. Indeed, holiness is the hidden source and infallible measure of her apostolic activity and missionary zeal. So essentially what CCC 828 is saying is just by canonizing people, the church is saying, emulate these guys. These guys did it right. You guys should copy them. And that's, that's all well and good. That says nothing about the beatific vision. And it's possible that this is something that was in the Baltimore Catechism and not in the CCC.
The CCC? Yeah, I could have sworn, and I think it was, because like I said, it all kind of gets muddled up in here. But yeah.
Yeah, and that's fine. If you ever do find it, shoot me a message on Reddit or
I will.
whatever, and we'll talk about it. But yeah, I guess maybe what I should do is I should sketch some of my I guess issues with the whole heaven and hell thing. So and you almost, so I don't want to say that you called it an issue, but you said that it was a mystery, I think is the word that you used. What it will be to be an embodied person in
Without
a
time.
timeless afterlife.
Yeah.
So the way that we think is like chemical reactions in our brains and stuff like that. Right? So that is change, right? Thinking is not possible in a split in any sliver of time. That is not thinking. Thinking is change. So if there is no change at all, and then none of us are thinking, are we even really alive? If we're not thinking, well, we have to be alive because it's eternal life, not eternal death, right?
Yep.
So we have to be alive, but there's also no time, and thinking is change, and so you're not thinking. And if you ask me, it kind of just sounds like it's a lot of, it's a lot of thinking about thinking. Good book, Thinking About Thinking by Dr. Jim Madden. But it to me it betrays a antiquated way. It betrays a lack of knowledge about human biology, and perhaps that's not the most charitable way to put it. But do you understand what I'm saying?
No, yeah, absolutely. And so this is to be 100% perfect. I'm going to step it away from this is what the church has definitively stated, and this is what we can know, and things like that, into the realm of, hey, this is James speculating. You know, I've got no idea if this is even close to correct. So when the church talks about the new heaven and the new earth, and you know, when you look at how the church fathers and the church has understood what the fall actually was, you know, with Adam and Eve and the fall, it wasn't necessarily a snake in the garden with an apple.
Sure.
You're more than welcome to believe that, but it wasn't necessarily that. It had more to do with the fact that Adam and Eve had unique gifts that they were meant to pass on down to their descendants that they threw away. Original sin is the lack of those gifts. So what do we understand from our belief on how that looked like before Adam and Eve fell? Well, they were immortal. And Augustine defines this as the possibility of not dying, as opposed to our current understanding of impossible to die. But even if they were to experience death, they would remain together forever with the divine. Their body and will were in harmony. There was freedom from suffering, not freedom from pain, but freedom from suffering. And a couple of other gifts that I'm struggling to remember right now. So the new heaven and the new earth, in my understanding and my personal opinion, is all of creation the way God originally intended it to be.
In time?
So those of us on the new earth would be in time, because in order for there to be an earth, it's temporal. So we don't know what the new heaven, new earth looks like. We know that there will be a new heaven and a new earth. We know that there will be a bodily resurrection. How does all of that work together? Your guess is as good as mine. And that's what I was talking about earlier, about like the way that the church operates, where right now all the church has said is you must believe there's a new heaven and a new earth. You must believe that there is a bodily resurrection. And you must believe that there is a second coming of Christ. How all of that works? Have fun.
Right. Yeah. and I guess
and actually, to go all the way back to the beginning, that's where Catholic philosophy comes in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of the critiques that I have don't necessarily come from this might be uncharitable of me to say, but to some extent, the church just kind of punts, right? The church just kind of drops the ball and kicks it. When it comes to the details, the finer details, the church might say you are bound to believe X and Y, but when it comes to how X and Y come about, we're gonna punt. Like we don't know it. You know, you guys have fun. And my I think that most of my critiques actually come from how X and Y come about rather than X and Y. But it does seem to me that a lot, and maybe this isn't your argument, but it does seem like a lot of Catholics want to say that your will is fixed post-death. And to me, if your will is fixed post-death, then either there's no time at all, and if there's no time at all, then you're not suffering or anything. So that's fine. I'm not really worried about that. That's annihilationism, frankly, if there's no time at all. But if there is time, well, who's fixing your will? We wouldn't be fixing our own wills because we are in time right now and our wills are not fixed. So that would mean that some external force is fixing our wills. Yeah. And if God is the one fixing our wills against, and even if he's not, then he's permitting our wills to be fixed by Satan or whatever. But that seems really cruel.
And so that's why I was like, when push comes to shove, I'll give an answer onto how I understand like the eternal or like, you know, the resurrected body in a temporal state or a non-temporal state looks like. And that's my best offer.
Yeah, and then it might just kind of be an appeal to mystery after that, right? It's kind of like, yeah, man, we don't know.
Yeah. But as far as like the fixed will aspect of things, I am very much in the camp of eternity is lack of time. And if I found a way to understand the resurrected body in a lack of time sense, I'm going that route. Like I am more than willing to go into that camp. But when push comes to shove at this point in time, based on my understanding, this is how I can explain it by appealing to a temporal state, even though I would much rather explain it in a lack of time state.
Yeah, so is it a little bit just an appeal to mystery at this point? And like, if it is, that's cool. Something that I kind of respect about our like Eastern Catholic friends and our Orthodox friends to some extent too. They seem to be a lot more comfortable just being like, yeah, man, it's a mystery. Deal with it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like,
I will say this. The one bad thing about Aquinas is that we lost that idea of being just okay with it's just a mystery, even though Aquinas was always okay with it's just a mystery. One of my favorite quotes from him is, "For one who has faith, no explanation is necessary. For one without faith, no explanation is sufficient."
And that is actually not exactly an Aquinas quote. That's like somebody paraphrasing Aquinas. I only know this because I literally just did a video that ended with that exact quote. But to be fair and it's funny, I quoted Cardinal Cupich or something who tweeted that exact quote and then dashed Thomas Aquinas. And I was like, well, if you quote, you won't find that word for word in the Summa, but what you will find, and I forget exactly where it is something that pretty much sums up to that. Like it's not that it's, but obviously, you know, Thomas, he's much more verbose than that quippy little quote. So that quippy little quote is the summary of like 2 paragraphs worth of very non-catchy information. But, and one of my big critiques, I think, and you might even agree with me here, one of my big critiques of like some Catholic apologists is they almost like want to have their cake and eat it too, to the extent where like they almost pretend to be empiricists, like I am. But then when it comes to these like mystery, well, it's not that they want to have their cake and eat it too. It's that they act like they're not ever appealing to mystery until you push them and they're like, well, it's just a mystery. And then I'm like, okay, but why were we playing this whole game then? Like, if it was a mystery this whole time, you should have just told me, you know, several paragraphs ago if I'm on Reddit, you know.
Yeah. So the thing about mysteries, and I think this is where the tension that you're experiencing is coming from. The church isn't saying that the mystery is illogical or
kind of, right?
It has
illogical, maybe, like outside logic.
only in the same way that like metaphysics is outside of physics, not where it's contrary. It's not illogical in the sense where it's contrary to logic, but rather it is beyond the scope of our ability of logic, that we can ponder it for millennia and still come no closer to a definitive answer.
Well, the Trinity violates classical logic. And the Trinity is broadly, like, considered to be a mystery, right? And do you know where I'm coming from where I said the Trinity violates classical logic?
I do, when one doesn't understand essence and persons.
No. So all I need to rely on is persons here. So you can essentially just say, like, is A B, is A C, and is A D. So is God the Father? Yes. Is God the Son? Yes. Is God the Holy Ghost? Yes. So A is equal to B, A is equal to C, and A is equal to D. Great. So far, so good.
Let me show you the
hold
mistake
on.
You're making there.
But then is B equal to C? No. Yeah. Even though by the transitive property they must be.
So here's the mistake that you're making. And it's an easy one to make. I'll give you that. It is an easy one to make, and I don't fault you for it because it's one that even Catholics make. Is Kevin human?
So you're asking a nominalist, so I would actually say no. But I can put on my realist hat and say yes.
Or, well, even just like, is Kevin a Homo sapien?
Right, you're still asking a nominalist, so I would still say no. But again, I'll put on my realist hat and I'll say yes.
Okay. Is James a Homo sapien?
Yes.
Is Lady Next Door a Homo sapien?
Yes. But that is not what we're saying about God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost.
But that's what I'm getting. By the logic that you used to disprove the Trinity, well, A is equal to D, B is equal to D, and C is equal to D, so therefore A and C must be equal to each other.
No, so the reason it's not the same is because it's not that. So the real way that you could phrase it is like, is Kevin a human, not the human? But Jesus is not a God, correct?
So
Jesus is God.
Well, this is getting into what So I'm glad you brought up Jesus. Jesus is the person of the incarnation. So Jesus is human and divine. One person, two essences.
But he's fully God.
He is fully God.
Yeah, that's the only part that I need.
Yeah, he is fully God. And he's also fully human. Right?
Sure.
This blew my mind in seminary. There is a subtle distinction, but an important one, between talking about the Son as the second person of the Blessed Trinity and Jesus as the incarnation of the Son. It's subtle, but it is an important distinction to keep in mind. But that's a whole other topic.
But it's not true to say that Jesus is only a God.
Correct. What I'm getting at, though, is so in our experience, one person has one substance, right? And I know you're,
I'm a nominalist, so I don't believe in substances, but yeah, putting on my realist hat, sure, people have substances.
One person to one substance. Jesus, though, we see that there's one person with two substances, right? So now we know that there isn't this one-to-one, logically speaking.
So, I mean, there is, right? Because Jesus is fully God, and that's the mystery.
Well,
it would be heresy to say that Jesus is not fully God.
Well, no, that's what I'm getting at, though. Is so, like, right now we're just focusing on the incarnation. You have a full God and full man, right? So one person with multiple essences, right? But we just talked about how our experience, logically speaking, if I said, hey, there's this person A over there, how many essences does that person have? You'd say, oh, just one.
Yeah, so I'm actually not relying on essences at all for this logical contradiction.
So, but that's what I was getting at within the understanding of the Trinity. that is the understanding of it. So if you're trying to strip away the essence aspect and the understanding of it, you're stripping away the identity of it. It's kind of like if a young Earth creationist was to come up to you and says, "All right, fine, I will grant you macroevolution, but or I'm sorry, microevolution, but I'm not going to grant you the fact that things can change over time." And it's like, well, no, you're not granting me anything because you're cutting away the very thing that is essential for you to understand this conversation. And so for the
I don't view it as me cutting, like I'm not letting you say that essence is, but let me kind of run through a series of 7 propositions. I imagine that you'll affirm each one of them, but then we'll notice that there is a contradiction. So,
okay.
I'll give you the first 3 premises because they're all the same. So premise 1, the Father is God. Premise 2, the Son is God. Premise 3, the Holy Ghost is God. So far, no disagreement, right?
Correct.
Excellent. Okay. Here are the next 3 premises, and then I'll do the final one. So, the Father is not the Son. Cool. The Father is not the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Ghost is not the Son. Awesome. Okay. Premise 7. There is only one God. Boom. Contradiction. Because there either has to be 3 gods, or premises 4, 5, and 6 have to be false.
So,
and I do promise you that this isn't actually controversial in like Catholic philosophy. It's called the logical problem of the Trinity, the LPT. And like Christians recognize this and are like, no, we understand that there's a logical contradiction. It's a mystery, bro. Like that's the.
So that's what I would call a poor apologist in my personal opinion. Because if you actually talk to some of the more learned Catholic apologists, like Jimmy Akin, they'll talk about how it has to do with a misunderstanding of the relation between essence and person. Because what's happening is you are accidentally treating the person as its own separate essence. But so the way that it goes is this. If I ask you, who are you? I'd get one answer, right?
Sure.
And if I ask, what are you? I'd get one answer, right? If I went to God and I said, what are you? I'd get one answer. If I went up to God and said, who are you? I'd get 3 answers. It's the mistake that a lot of people make is person equals being. Because you are a human being, you are Kevin O'Connor, and there's only one Kevin O'Connor. And who and what you are very neatly tied up in that. For God, it's not. But that's not necessarily a contradiction in the mathematical sense of like where.
Well, so here's the thing about like syllogisms. You will need to deny one of the 7 premises that I laid out in order to escape theological contradiction, and that can be done gracefully. It could be something like this: the Father per se is not God, or perhaps the Father is not God per se. What God is actually the unity of the Father, Son. You can do stuff like that, but the problem is all of those are heresies. Like, that's the problem.
Yeah, so what I'm getting at, though, is the premises are not complete, is how I'll put it. The Father is not the Son in personhood. The Father is the Son in essence.
Right. So then what you're doing is you're denying premise 4 per se. You're saying the Father is not per se the Son. That is false, is what you're saying.
I'm saying like your next 3 aren't complete is the way that I would do it. It's not that they're false, but that they're not. It's like
I can't think of a good example off the top of my head, but it's someone a Mote and Bailey fallacy is, I think, what it is. So like by accepting the small premise that everyone agrees the Father is not the Son, we all agree that. But what does it mean for the Father to not be the Son? That isn't fully explored, and so because of that, a false conclusion is drawn.
Maybe I can help you with something like this. So let's say
Yeah.
that you and I were both 30 years old. We can say premise 1, Kevin is 30. Premise 2, James is 30. Conclusion, therefore, Kevin and James are the exact same age. Well, maybe we weren't born on the same day, right? So Kevin is actually not 30 per se. He's not 30.000. And James is not 30 per se, but that's the move that you wind up having to make. So you have to wind up saying that it is not per se true that the Father is not the Son. You have to be willing to and that's where you get into some heresy.
So and that gets into the fact that English is a very messy language, because is the present participle of the verb to be. If you were to ask Aquinas to define the essence of God, he defines it as to be, being, is. So the very act of trying to do an is not thing for the personhood is very messy. And that's why we get into it's less of a mess of logic, I would say, more of a mess of language is how I put it. Because if God is the source of all of reality, then God can't be illogical. He can be beyond our understanding of logic. But because we have limits in our logic and in our language, it gets messy. And maybe this is my bias coming out. Because of the way that I understand God to be within the realm of logic, even if we ourselves are not using logic perfectly, I don't like using the phrase that God is illogical, or that there is illogical aspects within God, because that illogical comes with the connotation of being contrary to reason, and God can't be contrary to reason. And so the paradox, contradiction, it comes down to the messiness of language and the fact that we are limited in our use of logic and reason. Because the mystery itself is not contrary to logic and reason. We just don't have the right grasp of logic and reason to be able to understand it properly. That's why we will continuously meditate on it.
Yeah. So right and right. So let me agree with you twice.
Yeah.
The first one is there's a problem in English where there are two different forms of is within logic. There's the is of predication, and then there's the is of identity. So like, to use the Kevin example from earlier, like Kevin is a human versus like Kevin is me. So Kevin is a human is an is of predication, while Kevin is me is an is of identity. So like a good example of that would be like Paris is the capital of France versus Paris is beautiful.
Performer.
Oh, sure. Well, I even want to talk about the same Paris. So Paris is beautiful versus Paris is ugly. It doesn't matter, versus Paris is the capital of France. In Paris is the capital of France, we're using an is of identity, but in Paris is beautiful, we're using an is of predication, because is predicating something about Paris. So people have argued that the is in like the Father is God. Some people have said that it's an is of predication versus is an is of identity. But the problem is, if you want to argue that that's an is of predication, that's a heresy. Oh shoot, what heresy is that? I forget. But to like say that the Son isn't really like the Son isn't is identity God, the Son is predication God. That means that like the Son isn't God in the same way that Paris is the capital of France. The Son is God in the same way that Paris is beautiful. It's kind of like God is something that the Son has, but like that's not the Son's identity, and that is a heresy. So the Catholic here,
the way that
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Catholic is obligated to understand the is in the phrase like Jesus is God as an is of identity, not an is of predication.
Hmm. Yeah. And the way that the reason why the argument as you presented it, I think is successful is because of that aspect of the is, but it's also not the way that at least I would present it. Instead of saying the Father is God, I would say God is the Father, God is the Son, God is the Holy Spirit.
So you denying that
The
the Father is
Father is
God?
no, I said God is the Father.
As long as you're not denying that the Father is God, then we can put the sentence either way, and it wouldn't change the
So,
context.
but that's what I was getting at though is that's where the confusion comes from though, because personhood is predicated on a substance, because you have the substance before you have the person, and the person exists because of the substance. So
I don't believe that, but I'm a nominalist, so that's not.
yeah,
Yeah.
but so it comes from the fact that, like, you're correct. According to the logic and law of identity, we should be able to say God is the Father and the Father is God and have no issues.
Are you
do?
Ooh, this is getting spicy now. So you might be you might find yourself like bedfellows with like Arius or someone. I forget exactly who it was.
Well, what I was referring to is like within the argument as you present, or the 7 premises as you presented it, like it shows that, or at least hints that there's a proper way to understand the relationship of what it means for the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit to be God, and not one and the other. So where, according to the law of identity, we can't just willy-nilly flip God is the Father and Father is God and expect the logical outcome to be the same.
We can if the is an isn't of identity.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at. It's like, but and like I said, it just gets back into that point of I was getting. It's like the English language is messy, and that's why there's a huge push for like, no, you need to read Thomas Aquinas in Latin, or you know, a lot of it because of the messiness of the English language. But yeah, so like that's, to my understanding, that's what it means for something to be a mystery, is to get back on the original subject that we got onto. The aspect of what's the word I'm looking for?
Maybe I can help you even by saying, because I don't think so I explained the one agree, where the agree about the difference versus the is of predication versus the is of identity. But the second agreement had to do with mystery, which is kind of what you were about to start talking about, I think. And yeah, so I don't think that any Catholic is saying it's a mystery means that it's literally illogical. But what some people do say is they say like, yeah, classical logic is just not the whole picture, dude. And so famously on Christian YouTube, Inspiring Philosophy recently, when I say recently, I mean probably 6 months ago at this point, but he did a whole thing about, do you know Inspiring Philosophy? He's a non-Catholic. He's a, or at least he doesn't publicly disclose his denomination, which I think is Protestant of some sort. But he recently did a whole big thing about how he doesn't think that classical logic is the whole picture, kind of like how classical mechanics isn't the whole picture of mechanics either.
Right.
Like we found out that relativity is true. So like, you know, Sir Isaac Newton,
and then quantum mechanics throw a wrench in that.
yeah. So like Sir Isaac Newton did a great job, and his physics actually describes pretty much everything that we interact with on a regular daily basis. It just didn't quite work for explaining the motion of planets, and that's why we found out about, you know. And so IP, Inspiring Philosophy, this non-Catholic Christian apologist, was saying that classical logic is probably something similar, where, and by the way, there are like real philosophers who work on non-classical logics, and I'm going to be honest, I don't understand this stuff. But there are non-classical logical systems that wind up just like saying like, hey, the law of non-contradiction, we actually don't need that. And then it's funny if you just like don't really care about the law of non-contradiction, then there's no problem with right. And so a lot of Catholics will be like, no, yeah, we totally understand that the Trinity doesn't work with classical logic. We just think that at the end of the day, classical logic works to explain pretty much everything that we interact with on a daily basis, but kind of like how quantum mechanics is needed to understand the bigger picture. We need non-classical logics to understand the bigger picture, and God is part of this bigger picture. So the Trinity. So that's what people say. So they're appealing to a mystery in as much as they're saying like we don't really understand how this works, but we're also not telling you that like we're not saying classical logic is true. It's perfect. It needs no adjustment, and the Trinity is how it is. No, they're not saying that. They say the Trinity is how it is. If classical logic can't describe it, all the worse for classical logic. I guess classical logic isn't true. And so that might be the move that the Catholic apologist wants to make when it comes to the logical problem of the Trinity. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I'll need to look into that definitely. But yeah, like whenever I hear people try to use like you said, the mystery, illogical, making that correlation, it's like no, that's not what the church is trying to say when they talk about something being a mystery. It's rather that we're at the limit of our logic, and now we get to spend eternity contemplating what that means.
Yeah. And I would love to talk to you specifically about whether or not we are justified to kind of follow the church there. Like when the church is like, hey, look, it's a mystery, all the worse for classical logic. However, I don't know about you. It's getting late by me.
Yes.
Do you want to save that for another conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. Like if we can make this a semi-regular thing, I would love it. If you're okay with that.
That'd be awesome.
Because like I said, I've always wanted to do something in content creation, but I just don't have the time to do the editing and everything else like that.
Well, hey, luckily for me, stuff that we do this way actually requires very little editing compared to like the video essays that I do. So this is easy for me. So I will gladly do this all day with you. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Cool.
But yeah, no. And then the Fidesz at Oprah's, I think is how it's pronounced. The guy who founded the Dead subreddit and revitalized it, did mention, depending on how this goes, he would love to talk to you as a fellow Latinite, like the Latin Mass.
That'd be super cool. I would love that.
Yeah, so he comes from the traditional Latin Mass tradition. I come from, like I said, the Novus Ordo. So we kind of help balance the viewpoint and making sure that there isn't a
bias.
Yeah, like an overly biased type situation within it. I know that, like I said, he's super busy and everything else, but I know he did express, hey, depending on how things go, I probably would like to sit down and talk as well.
I'll let him watch this episode and judge for himself before he commits to anything, because I like to think that I was well behaved today, but in the event that he watches like that Kevin, that rascal, then no pressure.
You're well behaved so that way you can lure him in and then trap him. No,
exactly. Yes, this has all been an act. I have you fooled. Cool.
But no, I had a lot of fun doing this. All of your questions were very insightful. And I wouldn't say that they were, and I don't want this to come off wrong. It's not that they weren't challenging, because they definitely weren't easy. But they were definitely the right questions to push for the right type of conversation. And that's exactly what I was looking for.
Thanks, man. Hey, same to you. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. We wound up... so like it's funny. I went into it thinking that we were going to disagree more on, especially in the first part of the stream. I thought that we were going to wind up doing a lot of disagreeing about like apologetics and stuff like that. But we did disagree a little bit. But I think that you did a really good job kind of explaining what you did a really good job, I think, differentiating between philosophy and apologetics, and you gave me a lot to think about there. And it's possible that I'm just being uncharitable when I when I talk about the apologetics industrial complex and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I do have one final question for you. This is always the last question, and that is just where can we find your work? www.reddit.
Yeah, it's so the subreddit is Catholic Apologetics. I actually have a almost backlog. I don't know if you know of this app, iFunny. Back in high school.
Yes.
Back in high school, I wrote a lot of comic essays on iFunny, and I'm slowly working on getting a bunch of those, kind of modernizing it, cleaning it up a little bit, because high school James is very different from post college James.
Right.
But of getting that ready for the subreddit, I'm also working on kind of like a comprehensive explanation of papal infallibility. And that's something that I've been working on the back burner for a little while now, because I want to make sure it's done right with everything. So those are stuff that you can expect to see from me, when time permits it, on the subreddit. But it's just r/Catholic Apologetics is the name of the subreddit. The Discord is actually pinned to the top of the subreddit when you search by, as long as you're not searching by new.
Perfect.
But yeah, it's already pinned there. And yeah, like I said, as far as like saying what my work specifically are, I'm working on transporting them into the subreddit from my old stomping ground, so to speak.
Awesome. Well, by the time this goes live, the links will be in the description down below. So if you want to go join our Catholic Apologetics, and the Discord links are in the description down below. James, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.